Welcome, everybody. It's Georgia Reed here, your podcast host at Cybercrime Magazine, and I have a super interesting guest with me today, Mr. Hal Gregersen. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. So, Hal, you're the executive director of the MIT Leadership Center and a senior lecturer in leadership and innovation at the MIT Sloan School of Management. So, interesting story. Give me a little bit of background about yourself. How did you get into that position?
That's a great question. My father was a construction worker. We grew up moving from place to place, so I think I had movement in my genes going out into the world. So when I became an adult, we've lived in Hawaii, California, Utah, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Washington, D.C., England, Finland, France.
What
United
states
Arab
have you
Emirates.
not lived in? Maybe we should. Just kidding.
Right. So it's been a journey of place to place where each spot has led to another, launching pad of a different space. So I was teaching at a French-based school, INSEAD in Abu Dhabi, and ended up moving from there to Boston, and was actually working still for the French school, and ended up having an opportunity at MIT.
So you're a very curious person, inquisitive.
What's interesting is when you live in more than two countries, you're twice as likely to get a creative new idea that's coming from a question nobody else would have asked.
Is that a statistic
It
that
is.
you've... Okay, really?
So we've collected data. This was from a prior research study about the innovator's DNA, where literally 15,000 leaders from all over the world, and that basically says if you live in more than one country, you double the probability of getting a valuable new idea that comes from asking a question others don't ask. So yeah, it's data-driven, and others have basically replicated that. It's being able to take perspectives of other people, and that's what happens when you live in a place for long enough to see the world through their eyes.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, when I talk to people who may or may not have grown up with some sort of prejudice, I say, well, have you ever met a person like that? Do you know that for a fact, or is this just something you were born with and it's been ingrained into your system, but you just don't know for sure? So you're saying that there's actually statistical data to back that up.
Well, as long as you don't move into a different country and then isolate yourself enough that even though you might be living in France, you're living like an American.
In France.
And so you have American food flown in and you watch American TV, that doesn't help at all. But once you immerse yourself enough into a space that you see the world through their lens, that's when cool things starts happening. And that's also related to the work I do as senior level leaders, C-suite leaders, where the number one challenge they face is isolation, where people start telling them what they think they want to hear, and they stop telling them the things that they don't want to hear. And as a result, these senior leaders are just being set up to be blindsided because they've been isolated, living in a cocoon like some people do. Even when they're living in a foreign country, they live in a cocoon instead of being very deeply immersed in the world they're in. Well,
we found you because of the book that you wrote, and you had quoted our CEO, Steve Morgan, in the book talking about how $6 trillion worth of damages will be on our doorstep in no time by the year 2020. Cybersecurity damages. That's how much the world will be paying, $6 trillion annually. And that's just going to show you how small our world is becoming as human beings, that we can find each other and set up a podcast interview within a matter of days, just by a Google alert saying that you wrote about us in your book. And I want to talk to you about the book and your philosophy of questions and how being more inquisitive can help you not just in your personal and daily life, but also as a C-suite level executive, a CISO, a CEO. So what kind of questions basically should the cybersecurity industry be asking is what I want our listeners to bear in mind when they listen to this podcast. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy about asking questions and how questions are the catalyst for making discoveries.
There are a couple of, you just framed many questions for me.
Well, I want our listeners to be thinking, not for you. For you, so, tell me about the philosophy of questions. And maybe our cybersecurity listeners will be able to divulge some information from that.
Let me give you my entry point into cybersecurity, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Which happened a couple of years ago, talking to Lee Ardiv, who's this founder and CEO of Cyberreason. And it was for the MIT Leadership Center. I was interviewing him about leadership and inquiry and questioning. And I asked Lior, how do you know if the bad people, the bad folks are in your system from a cybersecurity perspective? And Lior laughed at me and he said, Hal, wrong question. I'm on camera like we're on camera. He said, they're already in. Simply the wrong question. They're in. The real issue becomes, what are they doing? Who are they? Why are they doing it? What are the patterns? What are their intents? There were a whole host of questions that I had not even considered with my simplistic starting point question of how do you keep the bad folks out?
Right. Which is what I would think too, as a lay person or not a cybersecurity expert, which I'm not. I just ask the cybersecurity experts questions for our magazine. So how do they get the bad guys out? And you're saying that was the wrong question to ask.
It was the wrong question. And even in that moment, I'll be very honest, I realized, well, number one, I'm wrong about the situation. Mm-hmm. I felt emotionally a little bit of uncomfortableness, like, oh, that hurts. Here I am on a camera and I'm exposing my ignorance for the moment. But then it caused me to be a bit reflectively quiet about the whole thing. And it led to a conversation with Lior that took us into terrain and into places that I never would have imagined about what does he do, both in his work world and even beyond, to be able to figure out what he doesn't know before it's too late. And this is the fundamental challenge from my perspective, especially for cybersecurity people. It's what's your strategy when you wake up in the morning to spend some time during the day somehow that would help you figure out things you don't know before it's too late. Because that's where the blind sides come from. That's where the breaches that are most catastrophic come from. It's from that knowledge space. And so I hope at least that cybersecurity leaders are better than most other leaders I ask that question of. Mm-hmm. Because most leaders are so busy, they're so running flat out with performance expectations, mm-hmm. that they have no time to step back and even attempt to explore what they don't know before it's too late.
Give me an example of someone that you've spoken to or seen in the media, even of a higher level executive who was isolated and failed because of it.
Well, to me, a perfect example, an unfortunately perfect example, is Travis Kalanick at Uber, who a few years ago gets into an Uber car and is being driven from point A to point B. This is a perfect opportunity for the senior leader of an organization, in this case the CEO founder of Uber, to actively seek passive data about what's going on in the system, to actively do some things to figure out what does this driver know that I don't know that might be helpful for us to either build a better system for the driver or to be able to do something more competitively to take on the world of mobility out there in ways we've never thought of before.
It's a good opportunity.
It's a great opportunity. So instead of taking that as an opportunity to actively seek passive data, fortunately for us, because we were able to see on video this whole interaction with the Uber driver, but unfortunately for Travis, this thing got taped. And basically, by the end of the conversation, the driver started complaining about things that were going on in Uber that were making his job difficult to do. And he knew it was Travis. And so then, instead of Travis saying, oh, tell me more, which is what someone like Guy Laliberté, who founded Cirque du Soleil, would say, instead of saying, tell me more, Travis was like on the attack. Or very defensive. It was defensive and on the attack about, no, we're not the problem, you're the problem. There was no way, shape, or form Travis was going to get that passive data, the information that he needed. And as a result, the conversation blows up, the video goes viral, Travis gets fired. And I think it's a single indicator for him of a pattern of action where he was not living as a leader in ways that led him to be wrong and uncomfortable and reflectively quiet on a systematic basis. And if we don't do that, we either get fired or we get blindsided in one form or another. It's kind of like the kid from an isolated community who goes out into the real world and then, So how would you prepare for that? How would you prepare to be that kind of outside-of-the-box thinker or questioner and not be defensive and scared and go on the attack? Part of what goes on there is it's really the preparation part is not necessarily getting a list of questions to go explore the world with.
Sure.
But it's figuring out what are some actions I can engage in on an everyday basis that will allow me to ask questions other people wouldn't ask. And so if we go back 20 years to Mark Benioff and pre-cloud era, when no self-respected enterprise would put their data into the internet, they just didn't do that. Mark Benioff spent literally hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of interactions for over a decade working for Oracle on the edge of the system as a salesperson, trying to do his job well, and he did it exceptionally well. But he also learned in that set of interactions on the edge of the system that what they were doing for large-scale enterprises was working in no way, shape, or form for small and medium-sized enterprises. Mm-hmm. He ultimately burns out, takes a year sabbatical, travels the world, interviews hundreds at least of people from all walks of life, all over the world, rich, poor, religious, government, business leaders, non-leaders, just trying to figure out this issue of what could we do for these small and medium-sized enterprises. And then he finally, a year later, gets this question that comes into mind while he's swimming in the Pacific Ocean. What if we sold enterprise-level software like Amazon sells books on the internet? Mm-hmm. He never could have had that question come to him by reading some book of questions.
Right.
He had the question come by being over and over on the edge of the system, actively seeking passive data. The point of the question came that nobody else was asking, and everybody else thought he was an idiot for it.
But it was quite innovative.
But it changed the whole industry
and
that we're living with today.
And all of a sudden you have software as a service.
Exactly. And so then that's my issue is what is my pattern of action on an everyday basis that would put us in situations over and over and over where either we're interacting with people or watching the world around us where things are so different that we get surprised. We realize we're wrong and it's uncomfortable. We reflectively think about it. And as a result, we ask questions and get ideas that nobody else is going to get.
Yeah, and that may be why Lior Div did very well in the cybersecurity space. I mean, he grew up in Israel, correct?
No, absolutely.
And that's a different type of country than we are. They're always on the defense. They're in a highly war zone, area. Mm-hmm. So Israel, I don't know if you know this, but they're the second biggest exporter of cybersecurity technology in the world. Mm-hmm. Our United States government is their number one customer. So this is something that maybe we wouldn't be aware of if we weren't asking questions that said, hey, how do I protect myself from threats constantly? Tell me about Lior and your relationship.
I ended up, again, through the MIT Leadership Center, where we have this approach to the world called problem-led leadership, that we basically, as leaders, were problem finders and solvers. And I ended up interviewing Lior and discovered an amazing set of stories about his history. So number one, as you mentioned, he grows up in Israel. He has that mentality of, to some degree, being under siege and having to figure out how do we deal with that. In the military, he becomes the team leader of the cybersecurity unit, cyber intelligence unit within the Israeli military. It's the 8200 unit. He's there for 6 years doing offensive intelligence and learning an amazing about what the bad folks and the good folks are doing. And at the end of that whole experience, he then realizes all that knowledge can be put into the company he founded, Cybereason, and in that space, he's using his experience growing up in order to ask questions that other people aren't asking in that space.
Mm-hmm. And it's great. It's very valuable for the rest of the world to have somebody who has that outside of the norm kind of thinking. And that maybe makes people more inquisitive. That's what I'm picking up from what you're saying.
Well, it's outside of the norm thinking and acting. And so he's constant. So, for example, if we worked for Lior, and we're there typing away doing our cybersecurity work, one of the measurements we'd have is how many things are we trying new and different today that we haven't tried before, and what's our failure rate? Mm. And if the failure rate isn't high enough, Lior's view is you're not trying hard enough.
Right. You need to be exponentially failing more to be trying hard.
Exactly. Yeah. Because from his perspective, that's what the bad folks are doing.
Yeah, they're trying.
They're experimenting nonstop and failing and failing and failing. And if we can't do the same thing, we will get outmaneuvered by them. And so what happens when we, like Lior, sets up those metrics, you get people to start failing, and that's the window to questions that open up new options.
So in your book, You write that cybercrime is an underworld full of unknown unknowns. Legions of shadowy hackers relentlessly devising new ways of breaching allegedly secure systems. If there's any problem realm crying out for fresh thinking, this would be it. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're here today. I want the cybersecurity folks listening to start asking more questions. Because, I mean, even Warren Buffett, when he did a presentation last year, he said, this is a big problem. This is the war that you're not seeing because it's not the threat of a bomb going off. It's not the threat of nuclear war, but it's actually a bigger threat than nuclear war. So that's why we're asking these questions with you here today.
Well, and the last 12 months I've had a unique opportunity to meet with probably 150 of the world's largest company CISOs. Mm-hmm. And to explore their world and understand their world. And one of the things I realized in talking with them and doing workshops with them is they are under enormous performance pressures. It's 24/7, it's nonstop, and for many, it's utterly exhausting. And their neck's on the line. And if
their
something
head's on
goes,
the chopping block.
Exactly.
Right.
And when I'm in that sort of intense, nonstop performance pressure situation, it's super hard for me to create this space where I'm actually getting out of my routine, talking with people, doing things, watching stuff that I normally wouldn't be doing in order to get surprised, in order to be wrong and a little bit uncomfortable and reflectively quiet. That's
busy.
Not what I wake up in the morning doing with intentionality.
What advice would you give to the CISOs who are listening? If they had, something from you, what would you kind of give to them, impart for them?
Innovative leaders of the most innovative companies in the world spend a third of their time actively seeking passive data to figure out what they don't know before it's too late. Mm-hmm. I do not have the magic specific formula for you as an individual CISO about how to create that space of 25% of your time, which sounds probably impossible. But if we don't create that space to get up, get out, get into the world, get on the edge of the system, to be exploring actively with people and in places where we're surprised with that wrong and discomfort. If we're not doing that, game's over. Mm-hmm. And so that's the issue. It's just like, how do we, and for me, that's what we have to figure out. So let me give you an example from the Middle East. Fadi Gandour, he's the founder, CEO of Aramex. It's a logistics company. He lands in Dubai at 2 o'clock in the morning as the CEO founder. He's got a meeting at 8 o'clock, and he's trying to figure out, how do I actively seek passive data in this moment by getting from the airport to the hotel? Now, most of us would just take an Uber or a taxi.
Okay.
But he's like, how could I actively seek passive data about my system? Okay, I'll call a delivery truck driver from Aramex to pick me up. And instead of being on the offense like Travis Kalanick was at Uber, going to the hotel, Fadi's on the offense, but it's about how can I actively seek some passive data. He's asked simple questions. What's working here? What isn't? Why? Why not? And he shuts up and he listens. And by the end of the ride, he realizes there are enough things going on here that are making this driver's job difficult. We need to have a fact-finding, truth-seeking conversation tomorrow with everybody involved to figure out what's going on. And that's what he did.
There was an example in another one of your interviews. I think you were mentioning the owner of a company going down to the warehouse for the first time in years.
Well, in this particular instance, it was a warehouse facility that was preparing things to go to the end user customers. And so these were packers putting stuff into boxes to go to customers.
Right.
And they were getting paid above market wages compared to the region. But they were complaining that things weren't fair. And the leader who was responsible for that, I was talking with him, and he's like, I'm not quite sure what's going on. Why do they feel it's so unfair when we're paying them more than normal for that particular kind of job? And I said to him, let's just take 4 minutes right now and ask nothing but questions about this issue, which I call a question burst. It's a simple method to ask.
Is that your 424 method?
It's a 4-minute
What's the
method.
question burst?
It's a question burst. It's a burst of questions for 4 fast minutes where there's no answers to the questions, no explanations about why we're asking the questions. And if we follow those 2 rules, you and I will get close to 20 questions in 4 minutes about the issue. And if we follow the rules, 80% of the time, we'll feel better about the challenge. 80% of the time, we will reframe the challenge. And 80% of the time, 85% of the time, actually, we'll have a new idea we didn't have before to help solve the challenge.
I want to do a question burst.
We should do it.
Do we have time for a question burst? You want to do one?
Before we do it, let me just finish the story, and then I'd love to do one. So
I'm sorry, I'm an interrupter. I'm not a good passive data getter, listener.
So here's the quick story. So we do this 4-minute 20-question exercise, and at the end of it, there were a couple of, I said, which questions really resonated for you? And 2 of the questions were, when was the last time you were in the warehouse facility? And he realized it had been a really long time. The second question was, what do you see in their eyes when they tell you it's unfair? Now that's cross-culturally, you can't do that in some places, but I think you know what I mean. It's like, what's the message behind the message? And he had no answers to either of the questions and decided he needed to get up, get out, get into the world, get into the warehouse facility, get enough trust in the system to get some answers to at least those 2 questions.
I think that could be extremely valuable in cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that when I talk to CISOs, they're saying they're breaking down silos as much as they can, but at the same time, they have to trust in their team that the team on this task is doing it the right way, because they don't have time to cross-train and cross-pollinate and break down the silos. However, I think it could be extremely valuable for our cybersecurity audience to try that.
No, let's do it. So, I mean, it could be that I do it individually. It could be that we do it. It could be that our team does it. The rules are no answers to the questions.
What are we going to burst about?
Pick a cybersecurity challenge, or for what, if you want to do a personal challenge or whatever, you pick the issue. Something that you or cybersecurity folks are really wrestling with. They care deeply about. They're committed to figuring it out, but they're stuck. There are no answers on this one.
Well, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but one of the biggest trending problems that we talk about a lot is ransomware attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So
and the problem is how to keep them from happening.
What to do when they do happen.
What to do when they do happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because should we pay the ransom? Should we not pay the ransom? Are we protecting ourselves enough from this?
Want to give it a run?
I'm not a cybersecurity. We can try it for a minute.
Or we can, we can do that. Or
Let's
we
do
can
a mini burst.
Or we can do one that about some issue that you think is more relevant in your world.
Should I get another dog? I'm just kidding. No, let's do the ransomware.
Do ransomware? Okay, here we go. I'm going to set this for 4 minutes. And either we get 15 to 20 questions, and if we do, once you number the questions, you write them down verbatim, word for word. If we get 15 to 20 questions, we'll stop before 4 minutes. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Sound good? 4 minutes is set. Mm-hmm. Remember, no explanations, no answers, as many questions as we can. And the challenge is, what do we do when ransomware hits, right?
Yeah. Or how to prepare for ransomware, and what do we do when it hits?
Okay, ready? Go. There we go. We're on.
Should I pay the ransom?
What is a ransom?
Okay. What should I be preparing, or what kind of communication plan do I have in place to tell my the CEO and then the media about this if it gets out? Public relations?
No answers. So what kind of, just try to write the questions down verbatim. Let's see. Who else knows about the ransom event? Why was I targeted? What patterns let the ransomware in? How might I lead ransomware astray? What if there were ransomware of ransomware? What was the first instance of ransomware? How much has it really changed? What if there were no such thing as ransom? Who else is getting into the business? What if we got into the business? What might reverse ransomware look like? Who else deals with ransom situations that we can learn from?
I mean, that's 15.
There we go.
That's pretty impressive.
So that was 2.5 minutes.
You're very good at asking questions.
I've done this for a long time.
But you're
I've
the
practiced a
question
lot.
man, the guru.
Yeah. But it's you know.
It seems like a valuable exercise.
Again, I can show you the data. Those percentages I gave you earlier. So this is a big issue. Imagine you're actually trying to figure this out. The next step I'd suggest to you is do this same questioning exercise with at least 3 other groups of people. No more than 5 people. 1 other person's fine. 2 is usually better than 1. But do it 3 or 4 times. Here's what goes on. Every time it's done, the questions lead us to reframe better and better what the real problem is. Because the reason we're stuck on getting a good answer to that is we just haven't framed it well and we're asking the wrong question. That's the issue. And so we keep reframing, we keep the energy going because we're feeling more positive than negative about it. We keep getting new ideas we otherwise wouldn't get. And even more importantly, as we do that with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, we're actively engaging other people in solving the challenge.
Kind of like you going to different countries and expanding your horizons and things.
Exactly. And in this case, it might be within your own organization, outside of it, but they all now, because you didn't ask them to give you answers, ask them to give them their best questions. By asking questions, we engage more with the challenge.
Should we wrap it up? We unfortunately are running out of time, and I know you have to get back to New York City.
Yeah.
This has been really interesting. And the book is called Questions Are the Answer, a breakthrough approach to your most vexing problems at work and in life. It's very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hal. It was very nice talking to you
Great
today.
to be here today.